In 2024, the Commanders finally found their identity, tough, explosive, and all led by a general manager who won't be swayed. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, David Harrison, and I'm covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. You can also find me helping out with WUSA9.com's coverage, and I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I'm appreciating you for coming through for today's episode. If you're an everydayer who comes through here every day, I appreciate you coming through every single day, especially today, for Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube for free, or also for free wherever you're listening to today's episode, which we're going to talk about depth hunting at the 2025 Reese's Senior Bowl, thanks to our pal, NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah. We're also going to dive into the 5 things that we learned about the Washington Commanders this season, all starting off with setting the identity. We're going to do that thanks to Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. In 2024, the Washington Commanders finally established, discovered, found their identity, toughness, explosiveness, and it's all led by a general manager who won't be swayed. That is the first thing we're talking about in our 5 things we learned about the Washington Commanders in 2024. We made this a weekly routine following every game. So now that the season is over, unfortunately, it is time to do the same thing for the entirety of the year. And the number one thing that we learned about the Washington Commanders was, who are the Washington Commanders? The team identity is set. It is firmly set. And as much praise as I want to give to general manager Adam Peters, and I do want to give him a lot of praise, it honestly actually starts all with managing partner, owner Josh Harris. In the beginning of the new GM and coaching search, he brought in a guy named Bob Myers, an NBA executive who helped build the Golden State Warriors into the dynasty and all that stuff that they are and were. And he brought him in to help the process. And some people were a little confused. Why do you have a basketball guy in here helping make football decisions? Even though Josh Harris said, look, he's not here to make X's and O's decisions. He's here to bring a certain level of expertise. I remember doing radio calls during this portion of last year, and I would get jokes cracked like towards me, not at me. I didn't make the decision. But I would get jokes cracked on the air about, this NBA guy is going to come in here and help remodel this football team. Well, Josh Harris said, quote, high quality people are available across many pursuits. So I think they were always looking for people that can help us, end quote. And that quote right there, that one sentence, always looking for high quality people that can help us in a variety of different ways. That is kind of where this whole thing fully started, because you end up with a head coach that gets hired that wasn't necessarily high on everybody else's radar, just like Bob Myers wasn't on the list of people that of course, Josh Harris is going to bring him in to help find this new regime for his Washington Commanders franchise. Dan Quinn wasn't the coaching hire either, but it's about focusing on what are we looking for. We're not looking for the sexiest headline. We're not looking for the sexiest candidate according to ESPN, NFL Network, Locked On Commanders. We're looking for the guy and the guys and the gals in other positions that can help us across the myriad of things that need to be helped to make a franchise successful. Turn now to Adam Peters, Josh Harris's first hire of last offseason. Adam Peters gets hired and says, quote, we're going to build this team the right way. We're going to build this team with a great process and a clear vision. You guys are going to see that on the field with the energy, the passion, the toughness, and the physicality, and all those things that are going to resonate in the DMV, end quote. Listen to those words again. Energy, passion, toughness, physicality. This is before they've even interviewed a head coaching candidate. This is before they've hired a coaching staff. This is before they brought in Dan Quinn. And then you go back to the Josh Harris quote, quality people across many pursuits, thinking about what people can do to help us do what we want to do. Again, in lockstep from step number one, because who they end up hiring, head coach Dan Quinn, who was asked about what a Dan Quinn coach team looks like. Very first words, explosive and physical. That is a quote. Then he goes on to say, the explosives come offensively and on the return game, from big plays through the run game, through play action, through the passing game, ones that can change field position. And those are the explosive plays that you have to keep going and being aggressive to go. on defense. That's the energy generating football that takes place on an interception, on a score for returning on defense, a forced fumble, the sacks, the ones that create negative plays for an offense to put them in some disadvantaged situations. Again, reiterating, here's Dan Quinn, the coach that's hired, and he had already hired his offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator by the time we met him. Those guys mirror exactly what Dan Quinn was saying on that day. What Dan Quinn was saying on that day mirrors what Adam Peters was saying the day that he was hired before he ever even interviewed Dan Quinn. And what Adam Peters was saying mirrors, and what they ended up doing mirrors what Josh Harris said and did himself by bringing in Bob Myers. So you want to know where this whole thing started from, or the identity of the Washington Commanders was established. It goes back to Dan Quinn, it goes back to Adam Peters, but really it goes back to Josh Harris having a clear vision of what he wanted for his franchise, for his team, for the DMV, for the Washington Commanders, going out and getting it, no matter what the public perception was. Again, jokes being cracked about bringing an NBA guy in to help remodel an NFL team. Well, guess what? If you're a team out there looking to rebuild yours, you might want to give Bob Myers a call because, he may not have an exclusivity deal with the Washington Commanders. But either way, I think with that right there, going back a year from now, from before now, you can see the framework and you can see the elements. And again, you hear some of those quotes from, early last year, and those quotes resonate through the entirety of this season. Their words, their words and their phrases and their mottos and their themes that we heard come back around all throughout the season. So number one thing that we learned about the Washington Commanders this year is who these Washington Commanders are going to be under owner Josh Harris and now GM Adam Peters and head coach Dan Quinn. And speaking of GM Adam Peters, we learned that he's a general manager, first-time general manager. This was his rookie season as a general manager, but he is not going to be pushed around. And I don't mean physically by other people or bullied into bad trades by other GMs. I just mean from all of the other things that can impact a general manager's decision-making. I think Adam Peters showed a really, really strong ability to stand up to whatever noise was around him from whatever angle or whatever context or whatever storyline it was coming at him from. He's not going to be tied to a first-round pick just because that guy was a first-round pick. As we mentioned in his history with the San Francisco 49ers, this is something that we go back to when he was hired. And I said, look, what I like about his past is he comes from a 49ers organization that swung and missed on quarterback Trey Lance. But when they swung and missed on Trey Lance, they didn't wait and drag it out and try to force it and try to force feed it down everybody's throat and say, no, it's going to be successful. He's a first-round pick. No, as soon as they realized it wasn't going to work out with Trey Lance, they cut bait. And they said, all right, we're good. We tried it. It didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. And some people will say, well, it's easier to do that when it's Jahan Dotson. Some people will say it's easier to do it when it's Jamin Davis, when it's not a first-round pick that you spent. But again, he was the assistant GM under John Lynch in San Francisco when they made that trade, when they made that pick, and ultimately when they made the decision to move on from him. So that type of motto, that type of theme of operating the front office really echoed through a lot of the moves that this team made throughout the course of this first season. Now, at the same time, he's also not going to be bullied by the splash play, right? Wouldn't give up what the 49ers wanted to get for Brandon Ayuk, wouldn't pay Brandon Ayuk what he wanted in his contract. Whatever part of that combination led to Brandon Ayuk ultimately not coming to the Washington Commanders, because there were talks between John Lynch and Adam Peters, the Commanders and the 49ers, about bringing Brandon Ayuk to the DC area. But whatever it was, whether it was the draft capital, whether it was the contract, whatever it was, Adam Peters showed, look, there's a line that I'm willing to come to for this guy. I'm not going by that line because the media want me to, because the fans want me to, because maybe even my quarterback wants me to. He's not going to buckle under that pressure. And then you go back to the NFL draft, trusted his evaluations. I look specifically at offensive lineman Brandon Coleman, who played 790 snaps on offense this year for the Commanders. More than 7 offensive tackles drafted ahead of him played fewer snaps this season than Brandon Coleman. And I remember that weekend. I remember being one of the people who said, look, I like Mikey Sanderson. I like Johnny Newton. I like what we see from Ben Sinnott. But I just wonder, are you not prioritizing the offensive line early enough here in the draft? Well, not only did AP not listen to that noise before the draft, not only did he not care about it during the draft, but he drafted a guy that, again, played more snaps for his team and played fairly well for a third-round rookie tackle than 7 other guys drafted ahead of him. So while we're all giving AP a little bit of side-eye on draft weekend, he's the only people that he's playing more snap or that played more snaps that were drafted in a position the Commanders could have drafted over Coleman. Roger Rosengarten for the Baltimore Ravens, who was on the clock when the Commanders took Jayden, obviously number 2 overall, Johnny Newton, Mikey Sanderson, and Ben Sinnott. And looking at who AP would have had available to draft at any of those positions instead of the guys he got and then not get Coleman, I'd rather have Coleman, man. The other guy, New England Patriots offensive tackle, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, unfortunately, undrafted free agent, played the 6th most or the 7th most snaps of every rookie offensive tackle this year. So proof in the pudding that you can find talent pretty much everywhere. But Adam Peters, again, obviously not a guy who's going to buckle under the public pressure, media pressure, fan pressure, or pressure from fellow GMs. He's a guy who's going to draw his line, say, this is what we're willing to do. And if he can't make it happen within those parameters, he's going to move on. And you got to dig it, man. Jayden Daniels is also a guy that you have to dig from 2024. And he's got certainly tons of potential, but the Commanders need more than just flashes of greatness, even for early season, to build a lasting future with him. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. The environment in Detroit was electric because of the open-air press box, presentation by the team, and just a buzz of fans from both the Lions and the Commanders side. And the great thing is, didn't hear a whole lot of stories of Lions fans being turds towards Commanders fans, but especially at the end of the game, sorry Lions fans, but Commanders fans certainly stood out amongst the crowd. Well, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events like that one even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You can browse through the deals simply, and I found great value for all kinds of seats in several different venues around my area. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Jayden Daniels has certainly showed a ton of potential. Future about to be Offensive Rookie of the Year, franchise records in certain areas, rookie records in other areas, things that we haven't seen ever done in the National Football League. But the Commanders do need more than just 1 year of greatness to build a lasting future behind quarterback Jayden Daniels. That's coming up next on our lessons learned this season. And if you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, you can do so by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you're going to get text messages from me about breaking news, analysis, show updates, all kinds of fun stuff. You're going to be able to send me text messages, give me your influence in mailbags, other things. Plus, you're going to get exclusive insider-only access to our Zoom conferences, which we are still going to be doing during the offseason. Actually, thinking about it today, I've got about a 15-hour drive ahead of me this weekend to New Orleans. I might fire up the Zoom machine on the way there. Won't be able to be on camera because I'm driving, but might be able to fire up the Zoom there. We'll just have a little bit of off-season conversation as we head towards New Orleans for Super Bowl Radio Row. So again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. The third thing that we learned this season about the Washington Commanders, now we get to some of the on-field stuff. Jayden Daniels could definitely be that man. He could be the franchise quarterback for the Washington Commanders that this franchise has been looking for a very, very long time. But Travis Kelce, Kansas City Chiefs tight end, on the New Heights podcast with his brother Jason Kelce, did bring up a good point that doing it once is impressive, but you got to do it again to really enter the conversation of being an elite quarterback in the National Football League. You got to be able to do it again. And if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this before, it's hard to be good in the National Football League once. It's even harder to be good in the National Football League twice, 3 times. That's what makes guys like Patrick Mahomes so special, Tom Brady so special, Peyton Manning, et cetera, et cetera. Jayden Daniels could be that special. We learned this season that already he could be that special. You do have to see it, though, again, the second season to fully embrace the eliteness that could be Jayden Daniels. Looking at rookie performances, we already know Jayden, among the best in NFL history, he's going to be the hands-down Offensive Rookie of the Year this year. I'm going to say that as boldly as I can because, in my opinion, there's no way he doesn't win that award. So in the Super Bowl era, Jayden Daniels' rookie season as a quarterback is 15th all-time in passing yards, 6th in passing touchdowns, 5th in rushing touchdowns, 4th in total offense, 6th in game-winning drives, 5th and 4th quarter comebacks. That is about as good as a rookie season in totality as you can possibly have. When you look at guys who had similarly good rookie seasons, there's not as many franchise quarterbacks on that list as you would imagine, which goes back to my point, but also Travis Kelce's most recently. Among those players that are top 20 in those categories with Jayden Daniels there. Jameis Winston is on that list. Kyler Murray is on that list, who I know got a second contract with the Arizona Cardinals, but he's 36, 45, and 1 as a starter. That's not necessarily franchise quarterback material. RG3 is on there. Trevor Lawrence, who's 22 and 38, again, got a second contract with the team that drafted him. Got it. 22 and 38. It's hard to call him a bona fide franchise quarterback at this time. Carson Wentz, Mac Jones, Baker Mayfield, who's doing good things with the Bucs now, but certainly flamed out with the Cleveland Browns. Gardner Minshew. All these guys are top 20 in total offense as rookie quarterbacks. None of them became franchise saviors that the people thought they might at the time, or consistent win producers. Now you look at the most recent offensive rookie of the year and friend to Jayden Daniels. You look at C.J. Stroud of the Houston Texans. He's also among top 20 in that list. From year 1 to 2, he actually won one more game in the regular season, but his completion percentage dropped. Passing yards fall by nearly 300 total, 3 fewer touchdowns, 7 more interceptions. Successful pass rate went down. Yards per pass attempt and per completion went down. Passer rating was 100.8 as a rookie, dropped to 87 as a second-year quarterback. Offensive Rookie of the Year, Pro Bowler, got MVP votes in his first season. No postseason accolades at all for C.J. Stroud in the second season. Now, that doesn't mean C.J. Stroud is a bust. Not going to be the Houston Texans franchise quarterback, but I think certainly the trajectory that he was on coming out of his rookie year, not the trajectory he is on now coming out of his second year. So, again, love everything that we saw out of Jayden Daniels, and I think what we can say we learned is that he could be the guy. We should not go as far as to say that he is the guy as a media member. As a fan, go nuts, right? But as a media member, he's supposed to be subjective, objective, unbiased, all that stuff. Exciting rookie year. Loved every bit of it. Really have a lot of faith in this guy. I do believe he is the guy. I will tell you that. But I think it's too early as an impartial member of the media to say he is the guy. I do believe he is the guy, but to say he is the guy would be a step too far, in my opinion. Number 4 thing that we learned about the Washington Commanders, running back Brian Robinson Jr., and even with running back Austin Eckler, they can't do it by themselves. While the Commanders finished 3rd this season in rushing yards as a team, they finished 16th in rushing yards when excluding quarterback rushing yards. Both the Eagles and the Ravens, 2 of the more quarterback-heavy running teams in the NFL, along with the Commanders, finished in top 5 in rushing when you take out the quarterback yard. So it's not just Jayden Daniels rushed for a lot. Yes, he did, but so did Lamar Jackson. Jalen Hurts not as much, but Jalen Hurts still certainly does some damage of his own. The Cardinals with Kyler Murray, who again, Kyler likes to say heavy as a passer, but will run the ball. They were 7th in total rushing outside of quarterback stats. The Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen, who likes to run the ball a good amount, were 13th. So again, not just a quarterback is eating the rushing yards issue. 4.5 yards per non-quarterback run average this year was not great, but it was solid. But that number dipped to 4 yards per carry from running backs, wide receivers, non-quarterbacks, basically, between weeks 9 and 18. In the playoffs, the Commanders had the lowest non-quarterback rushing yards average, 4.2 yards per carry of all NFC teams. In the wild card round, specifically against the Buccaneers, that number was 2.3 yards per carry for non-quarterback rushers, worst of all the playoff teams on wild card weekend. In the conference championship round, it was 2.7 yards per carry. Again, worst of all the playoff teams in the conference championship round. The average was actually above 5 yards per carry for the entire postseason, was only fixed or over 4 yards rather, was only fixed because they averaged more than 5 yards per carry by non-quarterbacks against the Detroit Lions. You just have this one anomaly there that really kind of skews that data. Now, whether it's an O-line fix, getting another back to create a 3-headed approach and keep the guys fresher, replacing one of those top 2 backs. I know some people want to do that, or if it's a scheme issue. Likely it's a combination. 1 or 2 or 2 of those things or even more have to be done, but at least 2 of those things. It has to get better, whatever it is, because there's always going to be someone who can stop what you do best. So you've got to be able to do your second best thing good enough to survive when you go up against that type of a situation. And clearly, Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, for as talented as both those guys are, they can't do it by themselves. Last thing we learned, well, not the last thing we learned, but the 5th thing that we learned here on this list of 5 things, defense is still a problem for a defensive-minded head coach. Obviously, Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded head coach. Defense was a problem very, very often. Dan Quinn is a defensive head coach. His defense is a problem, so they need to get that fixed. In his introductory press conference, going back to that again right now, DQ said what jumped out at him about this team coming in was the defensive tackles. At the time, he's talking about Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen, the wide receiver group, Terry McLaurin, and certainly liked what he saw in guys like Diami and so on. but also said the team needed to have elite talent on the edge. Well, wouldn't necessarily call this edge group elite. Gave up the second most rushing yards off tackle and outside in the NFL this year. The DTs weren't as solid up the middle. Now, John Allen was injured for a good part of the season, but the most rushing yards given up the middle by this Commanders defense this year. And the wide receiver group certainly has room for improvement beyond Terry McLaurin. The Commanders were 11th in total sack rate by defenses, 15th in pressure rates, which means they were relying on getting a lot of sacks on those pressures, or else they weren't going to get as many sacks at all. So certainly the defense needs to be worked on this offseason from multiple levels in order to fully become a big-time contributing part of this team's success. Moving on to things that are happening today. There were some intriguing names from the Senior Bowl this year that could provide key pieces for the Commanders, especially on the defensive line that we're talking about, and the offensive line where they need depth and versatility. We'll talk about that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports with over 10 million members, including yours truly, and billions in winnings awarded. A little bit of that to me. Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Well, here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard for you to win that selection. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're going to cash out. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. So download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup with Prize Picks. Run your game. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, talking about the Reese's Senior Bowl. I was not at the Reese's Senior Bowl this year. Usually I am, but because the Washington Commanders decided to mess around and make it all the way to the NFC Championship game, I was a little bit preoccupied. Didn't head down to Mobile. Didn't pull an Adam Peters. I had to stay here for locker room clean out, stay here for end of season press conferences, things like that, and decided to forego it in lieu of doing my job as a Commanders beat reporter. But there are some intriguing names down at the Senior Bowl that can provide key pieces for the Commanders, especially in the trenches. And we're going to turn to our friend Daniel Jeremiah of NFL.com. He, of course, was in Mobile. He may not be anymore. I'm not sure. But the Senior Bowl is airing. The actual game is going to air Saturday, February 1st at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time on NFL Network. So if you want to watch the game, you'll be able to do that as long as you can get NFL Network. And there are 12 players that stood out to DJ, according to his article at NFL.com. So I suggest you read that. But I want to go through that list with a Commanders lens and kind of bring you some of the most intriguing names that I found from DJ's list. Defensive tackle Darius Alexander is the first one out of Toledo. DJ says he flashed each day of practice. Good combination of size and athleticism. Reminds DJ of Chiefs defensive tackle Chris Jones, currently mocked in the 5th round range. These mock projections are all according to Mock Draft Database, who collects all the mock draft data it can get, averages it all out for us. And of course, those things are pending, potentially will change as the season goes on. So defense tackle Darius Alexander showing up for DJ. Linebacker Jeffrey Bassa out of Oregon. DJ said he flashed leadership, potentially groomed to come in with Frankie Louvu after Bobby Wagner's career is over. We like Jordan McGee, but he was injured a lot. Dominique Hampton is a safety linebacker convert, so we're not sure where he is. He's also getting 5th round range in mock draft. So Jeffrey Bassa out of Oregon, an interesting guy to keep an eye out on, or for if you're watching the Senior Bowl on Saturday. Defensive tackle Joshua Farmer, Florida State prospect, 5th round projections in mock drafts. DJ identified his strength and quickness, scheme versatility, says he can 2-gap if you need him to. Edge rusher Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M is getting late 1st round buzz right now. Only 4.5 sacks in 37 career games as an edge rusher at Texas A&M. Not good, but DJ says he had an impactful week, showed a lot of elite traits. So it's going to be indicative on coaching staff to figure out why his elite traits didn't produce sacks in college and if they can fix that. Tight end Mason Taylor, LSU product, son of Jason Taylor, former Miami Dolphins defender. 3rd round projections in mock drafts. DJ comps him to Zach Ertz. So you can connect the dots on why he would make this list. Wide receiver Kyle Williams out of Washington State, currently not being drafted in mock drafts. However, Lance Zierlein of NFL.com has given him a 6.2 grade, which equals out to eventually being a starter, which means the mock drafters basically just don't know much about him right now. Mock drafting, not an exact science if you haven't figured that out. Lance Zierlein compares him to Denver Broncos receiver Marvin Mims Jr., which is very exciting if you ask me. Fifth-year senior, so he hits on the experience button for the Washington Commanders. Smaller speed guy. Look at him as kind of a better OZ. Created separation a lot during the Senior Bowl practices, had a really polished release, according to Daniel Jeremiah, put himself in day 2 conversation. So even though he's not being drafted in mock drafts, DJ says he's a day 2 type of guy right now. Offensive tackle Gray Zabel is the final guy we'll look at here. North Dakota State University, 3rd round projections in the mock drafts. DJ says Zabel has 1st round buzz following the week he had in Mobile, competed at guard and tackle, but also took reps at center. And Daniel Jeremiah says he looked good at all of the positions, played 4 O-lineman positions at North Dakota State University. So you talk about offensive line depth and versatility. Gray Zabel seems to be bringing all of it. So those are some guys to watch out for if you are looking at watching the Senior Bowl again on Saturday. And those are guys whose names will probably come up again in future mock draft conversations. Speaking of, next episode of Locked On Commanders will be Mock Draft Monday. Mock Draft Monday officially back, so we're going to dive into our Mock Draft Monday, our first Mock Draft Monday of the offseason. I'm going to drop a mock draft, and then usually what I do is I go through 2 other mock drafts out there in the media world, and I review them and share my thoughts on them. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. It's a brand new format twice per day. It's the all-new Locked On NFL. As always, I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, every dayers. I want to thank you for coming through every single day. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.